Your heart has beaten about 2.5 billion times since you were born. It will beat somewhere between 1 and 3 billion more before it stops. This without anyone telling you you've planned your whole life inside that window. Now take that window and multiply it by 12. Not 12 more years, 12 more lifetimes. The first thing you notice is that you have no idea what to do. Not because the life is too long. Because every assumption you built, when to start, when to stop, what counts as late, what counts as wasted, was calibrated for a body that gives out at 80. None of those assumptions survive contact with 1,000 years. That is not the strangest part. You are 53 years old. Your parents are 512. They remember a world with no satellites, no antibiotics. No indoor plumbing. They are not dead. They are at the same dinner table. They disagree with almost everything you have decided to do with your life. And they have been disagreeing for the past 400 years inside almost every cell in your body. There is a kind of biological clock. It counts each time the cell divides. A small section at the end of the chromosome gets shorter. These sections are called telomeres. In a normal human life, they shorten for about 70 or 80 years before the cell can no longer replicate cleanly. The cell stops dividing. It lingers. That accumulation of lingering cells is a significant part of what we experience as aging. In 2009, Elizabeth Blackburn at the University of California, San Francisco shared the Nobel Prize in Physiology for this discovery. She had spent years mapping exactly how the shortening happens and what enzyme, called telomerase, can slow or partially reverse it. The enzyme is real. It already exists in your body. In certain cells, it is running right now, but here is what the research also showed. The cells that run telomerase continuously are not aging cells. They are cancer cells. The biology of very long life and the biology of uncontrolled growth are pulling in the same direction. Every pathway that keeps cells dividing is also a pathway that, under the wrong conditions, refuses to stop. That does not mean 1,000-year life is impossible. It means the body keeping you alive that long would be a fundamentally different body, one that does not currently exist and has never existed. We are not talking about the same machine running longer. We are talking about a different machine, researchers working on senolytics, drugs that selectively kill the lingering, non-dividing cells. Have extended healthy lifespan in mice by as much as 35% if that translated linearly to humans. You'd be looking at an average lifespan around 115 years, not 1,000. To get to 1,000, the intervention would have to be roughly an order of magnitude more powerful than anything currently in trials. But suppose it works. Suppose some combination of gene therapy, cellular reprogramming, and periodic biological maintenance gets you there. You wake up on your 203rd birthday in good health. You go for a run. Your knees are fine. What does that person want? In 1943, the psychologist Abraham Maslow at Brooklyn College proposed that human motivation runs in layers: survival first, then safety, then belonging, esteem, and finally what he called self-actualization, the drive to become what you are capable of becoming. He drew it as a pyramid. Most people spend their lives somewhere in the middle, 1,000. Year life flattens that pyramid. The concerns of the first 100 years, finding your place, building something, making something that lasts, are solved by year 200, or abandoned, or rebuilt from scratch after a catastrophic mistake you made in year 117 and have spent the last 83 years trying to undo. You have 800 years left. There is a body of research on what happens to human motivation when the goal is removed. In 1975, Judith Rodin and Ellen Langer at Harvard ran a study with elderly residents in a nursing home. One group was given a plant and told they were responsible for keeping it alive. They decided when they wanted to watch movies. They were, in small but real ways, the agents of their own days. Another group was given a plant cared for by staff, told when movies were scheduled. 18 months later, the group with agency had a mortality rate less than half that of the comparison group, not because they were healthier at the start, because they had something to decide. The assumption has been that 1,000-year life is one continuous life, one self, accumulating experience, carrying every memory forward, building a single coherent story from 0 to 1,000. That assumption is almost certainly false, and not for a philosophical reason. For a storage reason, the human brain holds somewhere between 2 and 2.5 petabytes of information. By most working estimates, that number is contested, but the rough scale is not. At the pace of a typical adult life, sensory data, emotional weight, procedural skill, you are probably filling a meaningful fraction of that capacity by age 80 or 90. The reason older people forget things is not purely that neurons are dying. It is partly that the system is managing what to keep. Over 1,000 years, That system would fail. Not metaphorically, literally, you would either lose access to most of what happened before, or you would need a brain structured so differently from the one you have. Now, that calling it the same brain would be a courtesy. You would not remember being 22 the way you remember yesterday. You would remember it the way you remember reading about someone else's life. In 2007, Carl Pillemer at Cornell interviewed more than 1,200 Americans over the age of 70 about what they wish they had understood earlier. The answers clustered around the same themes. Time spent in conflict was almost universally described as wasted relationships that dissolved over things that seemed large at 30 seemed from 70 like nothing at all. Now imagine that conversation with someone who is 400 years old. Their threshold for what counts as a large thing has moved so far that your entire lifespan, birth to death, would fit inside a period of their life they might describe as a rough patch in their 200s. Every grief you have ever had, every triumph, every formative experience, all of it sits inside one chapter of their story. A chapter they may not be able to fully recall. A relationship between a person who is 30 and a person who is 900 would not be a relationship between two people in the ordinary sense. It would be something closer to a relationship between a person and a geological formation. Not the biology, not the politics of who gets access to the treatment first, though that question is worth sitting with for a moment. If 1,000-year life requires a medical intervention, and that intervention cost what advanced medical interventions currently cost, then the first cohort of 1,000-year humans will be the people who are already going to be fine. They will own property for 8 centuries. They will sit on the boards of companies for 600 years. The phrase generational wealth will require a new word. Retirement systems are calculated on the expectation that people stop working and then stop existing within a predictable window. Educational systems are organized on the premise that you learn intensively in the first quarter of your life and then apply what you learned for the remaining 3 quarters. The entire concept of a career assumes a timeline in which those phases fit. Stretch that timeline by 12 and none of those structures work. What actually happens, many historians and anthropologists think, is a kind of serial identity. You would not be one person for 1,000 years. You would be 6 or 8 or 12 distinct versions of yourself, each one emerging after the previous one ran out of momentum or curiosity or reasons to continue doing what it was doing. The Roman philosopher Seneca wrote around 50 CE that most people do not have long lives. They have wasted lives. That the person who dies at 30, having paid full attention to every day, has lived longer in any meaningful sense than the person who reaches 80, having paid attention to almost none of it. He wrote that in his 60s, knowing he was going to be forced to die within the decade by the Emperor Nero. He had been working with that deadline his whole adult life. It made him sharper. Take away the deadline, not permanently, not forever. Just remove it as a near-term pressure. You are 30. You will almost certainly still be alive at 500. The sense of urgency that Seneca was writing about, the one that he argued is the real source of a life lived well, dissolves. Not immediately, not consciously, but it dissolves. There is a body of psychological research on this called terror management theory, developed in the 1980s by Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pyszczynski, drawing on the earlier work of Ernest Becker. The central claim is that a large portion of human motivation, creativity, striving, the drive to build things that outlast you, the need to belong to something larger, is driven by the awareness of death, not fear of pain, not fear of the process of dying. The specific awareness that you, this particular configuration of matter and memory and preference, will stop. Becker's 1973 book, The Denial of Death, won the Pulitzer Prize. His argument was that civilization itself, art, religion, war, the entire architecture of meaning humans have built, is a response to that awareness. 1,000-year life would not remove death. It would just push it far enough away that it becomes, in practical terms, theoretical. The way heat death of the universe is currently theoretical for you. You know, it will happen. It has no effect on what you order for lunch. Every piece of research on procrastination, on creative output, on the intensity of experience, on the memorability of events, points in the same direction. Scarcity creates attention, not scarcity of money or resources. Scarcity of time. The reason a piece of music is moving is partly that it ends. The reason a person you love is precious is not only the quality of the relationship, it is the awareness somewhere in the background that neither of you will always be there. The counter-argument comes from what actually happens to very old people, not sick people, not people who are suffering, healthy people in their 90s and past. The ones who have aged without major cognitive decline, when researchers interview them, a consistent pattern appears, not sadness, not fear, a kind of readiness, a sense that the account has been settled, that there is a natural conclusion to a particular kind of striving, and they have reached it. This is not resignation. This is something that looks from the outside like completion. The gerontologist Laura Carstensen at Stanford has spent decades studying this. Her socio-emotional selectivity theory, developed through the 1990s and 2000s, proposes that as people perceive their time as limited, they shift their priorities, they invest in fewer relationships. They pursue experiences with emotional depth over novelty. They become, in measurable ways, more satisfied with less. Her work shows this shift is driven by time perception, not age itself. Young people who are seriously ill show the same pattern. Old people who feel healthy show a delayed version of it. The implication for a 1,000-year life is precise. The psychological shift toward depth and satisfaction that most people experience in their last few decades would arrive, if it arrived at all, somewhere around year 850. Everything before that would be by Carstensen's model, the motivational equivalent of early adulthood, restless, acquisitive, novelty, seeking. Unable to settle 850 years of that, you would not be wise. You would be the world's oldest 25-year-old. The case for a 1,000-year life is real. It deserves to be stated plainly. More time means more chances to fix mistakes, more years for understanding to accumulate. More capacity to see the long consequences of decisions that, at 80, you only glimpse the beginning of. A doctor who has practiced for 300 years is not the same doctor who practiced for 30. A parent who has watched 12 generations of a family grow is not the same parent who watched one. There is a kind of wisdom that requires duration. We have never had access to it. We do not know what it would produce, but understanding is not a function of duration alone. It is a function of pressure, of consequence, of the awareness that this conversation, this decision, this afternoon is not one of an infinite series of rehearsals. It is the thing itself. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio at USC has spent his career studying patients with damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, a region of the brain involved in connecting decisions to their emotional consequences. Patients with lesions there can reason perfectly, they can list pros and cons, they can evaluate options. What they cannot do is choose, because choosing requires caring about the outcome, caring requires the possibility of loss, and loss requires something to be finite. A 1,000-year lifespan would not damage that region of the brain, but it would do something functionally similar from the outside. It would remove the experience of genuine finitude from almost every ordinary decision. Every relationship could be revisited. Every career could be abandoned and restarted. Every place could be returned to. The feeling that this matters right now because now is the only window. That feeling would not survive 8 centuries intact. You are asking whether a human life is valuable because of its content or because of its shape content. The experiences, the relationships, the things understood, the work done shape. The arc that has a beginning builds toward something and ends. Every story you have ever loved has a shape. Every piece of music you have ever been moved by has a shape. The shape is not decoration. The shape is what makes it a thing, rather than a sample of an ongoing process. A 1,000-year life would have content, staggering amounts of it, enough experience for 100 ordinary lifetimes, most of which would be forgotten by the time the 1,000 years were up. But the shape, the sense that this particular story is going somewhere, that the stakes are real, that the time spent is not recoverable, would be gone. Not because anyone took it, but because you would have removed the condition that made the shape possible. The biologists working on longevity are solving a real problem. The body breaks down. The breaking down involves suffering. Reducing suffering is worth doing. But the 1,000-year life and the 80-year life are not the same thing with different numbers. They are different things. One of them has never existed, and the humans who would live inside it would be unrecognizable to the ones who spent centuries wondering what it might be like. Your heart will beat about 2.5 billion more times. That turns out to be enough.